Welcome to Beyond Disruption, where you'll learn how emerging tech is changing the world of accounting, business, and finance. Our guest experts break down the latest news in everything from blockchain to robotics, artificial intelligence to human intelligence. Tune in to find out how you can stay ahead of the curve.
Hello, welcome to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, where we share insights on emerging technology, human intelligence, and digital transformation. Exclusive perspectives from inside the accounting and finance profession that help you stay ahead of the curve. From our office in London, I'm Kyle Hannon. In this episode, how to become irreplaceable in a commoditized world, we'll be talking about going digital. What you need to know when advising your paper-only clients to leave that pen and paper behind. We'll be doing that with Georgette Rowland Osborne. She'll be helping us answer questions like, what do solopreneurs and startups tell us about moving an established business to the cloud? How to continue to be crucial to our clients? And how do we become a client whisperer? Yes, I know it sounds a little out there, but that's what people said about the internet. You can find links and more information in our show notes, which you can view inside your podcast app or online or by going to gobeyonddisruption.com. Let's get started with this episode's conversation. Hello, Georgette. Where are you speaking from today?
I'm speaking from sunny London.
Georgette, thank you very much for taking the time to share your insights today. For those people who haven't heard of you, you are director of the Financial Gym, as well as Precision Services Outsourced Bookkeeping. You're also creator of the Firmer Figures Finance Program for Entrepreneurs, as well as author of the book Firmer Figures, Fess Up or Mess Up. Now, you've not been doing this forever. You entered the cutthroat world of IT and finance right here in central London, not far from where I'm sitting right now. And you did so at a time when it was not the easiest place for women to belong, let alone one from an ethnic minority. However, you climbed the corporate ladder, you became manager of a bespoke IT outsourcing company in the city, and your main speciality was working with banks. Your portfolio of clients included Bank of England, Merrill Lynch, N.M. Rothschilds, NatWest Bank, Ministry of Defence, and ironically, the Inland Revenue, which is something we'll be talking about soon. You're an author and a speaker, you're a podcaster too, and you're also a strong campaigner for female financial independence and empowerment. And if your career and all of the stuff I've talked about has shown you one thing, it's that so much of what made you successful in big business had no place in small business. And for startups and entrepreneurs, there's definitely a different, much tougher set of rules as well as fewer safety nets. And that's a big part of what we'll be talking about in this podcast, which, as I said, is called How to Become Irreplaceable in a Commoditized World. So what have I left out? Georgette, what else are you working on? How does it connect with our topic?
Well, the thing that underpins all of that, and I'm thinking, gosh, is that me? The thing that underpins all of it really is the human side of it. So we talk about big business, small business, SMEs and so on. The thing that I never forget, or we can never forget, is that even when you are dealing with a business where maybe you have to put in a proposal or you have to tender, at the end of that piece of paper or that quote is always a person. And if we always keep in mind that we're dealing with a person who makes decisions not based on logic, but based on emotion, we'll always have a slight advantage over our competitors and who we're selling to. So that's always a thing that motivates me, because the reason most people call me in is because on an emotional level, they've got some kind of stress going on.
Okay, so give us a sense of what that might typically look like. What, in fact, does your typical day, if you've got such a thing, look like? What sector and client types are you focusing on now? Because we know where you used to focus your attention. What problems do you typically help people with or clients with these days?
It started off very compliance-based. So my audience really were accountants. I never loved accounting myself because it was so much based on the analysis after the fact. And I always loved rolling up my sleeves and getting deep down into the trenches of a business, which isn't a natural thing that accountants to date, more so now, of course, have been known to do. So that's why the bookkeeping side really took off. What happened then, it merged into consulting, Because while you're in there, I mean, when you're dealing with someone's finances on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, you get to know their most intimate financial secrets, whether it be on a business level and often on a personal level. So what I find I'm doing a lot of the time, answering questions based on, if I do this, is it a good idea? Or I've been offered this, what do you think? But the place we have to go back to are always the figures. So the figures underpin everything. But whereas I was taught to sell to somebody the benefit of having figures on time, actually, I have yet to meet an entrepreneur, bar one. Having said that, I can pick that one out after a client of mine, where the figures were the paramount. And that's only because they're getting pressure from above to produce figures. Everybody else had another agenda. And I guess you need to do some bookkeeping or accounts for me to get that. Then is that the case? So my typical day really consists of making sure things are in place so that the questions each individual business owner needs to answer can be answered in the way he wants or she wants when they want it.
So when we're talking about becoming irreplaceable, we assume that certainly every business that you've worked with when you were working here in the City of London, dealing with banks and some of those globally recognized names, we know that they need accountants. We know that they've got their own financial teams. But doesn't every business, no matter what size, need an accountant or financial advisor? Surely they're always irreplaceable. Why is this so important right now?
And this is, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about disruption and so on. But no, and it's a fallacy. I come from the world of IT, and we used to say, everybody uses computers. Everybody needs a computer. Everybody needs computer training. No, they don't. Not at all. Some people need some. Not everybody needs to have cornflakes for breakfast. Not everybody eats egg and bacon. We all need to eat in the morning. Maybe you don't. Some people fast. As a profession, we have traditionally, and the IT sector, so I come from the two sectors that have been a little bit arrogant about what we do, is, well, everybody needs us. No, they don't. And when we recognise that and realise that actually to work with a business and to be able to work alongside a business as they grow is actually a privilege to be in there, because they don't have to have us. Now, some have no choice. Compliance is a killer if you're a bigger business. If you're over the VAT threshold, your cash flow is under pressure because you're growing and so on. But the majority of businesses that are small can get away pretty much with doing the bare minimum in accounts, as long as they watch their cash flow and they're compliant in terms of filing their tax returns online, because the majority of them aren't limited companies either. So there is a lot of them out there that simply don't need us per se, but would improve what they do if they took us on board.
And this is important, because why we might not be crucial to that business from the perspective of compliance, because they might be able to do a lot of that stuff themselves. And this is something, as you said, we will talk about soon. The ways that you can continue to add value and become a better partner to that sort of client would be because you understand them and their real business situation. You've gone beyond the compliance. You've gone beyond the figures. What you've done is you've discovered that by stepping deeper into their world, you can give them much better professional advice and assistance, the type of stuff they really need, which has nothing to do with compliance per se. So we're talking almost about becoming a client whisperer. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, totally. If one more person says, you know more about my finances than my husband, or more about my finances than my wife, not because they're hiding anything, but because even in the most intimate relationship, it's not often required to go that deep into the financial side of things. You come to an agreement together, possibly. You have a routine in place and who's responsible for what. But we dig in a way that we're looking for how your finances today translate into what you want out of your business and hence your life down the line in the short term, mid-term, long term. And for some people, as a legacy. Digging into compliance doesn't get you that. And also, often the client doesn't feel comfortable discussing a lot of things with you because they think it's out of context. All they're thinking is, I want to leave something for my children, but you want to talk about profit and loss and whether they should use QuickBooks or Xero and so on. And they're like, they really don't care. They have a reason for why you're there. Often you're there because they have no choice. I mean, making tax digital has put a lot of people in the position where there is no choice now. If you're over 85,000 VAT threshold, well, then you pretty much have to do what the HMRC are asking. But for many others, it's more complex than that. It's a means to an end. And our job is to identify what that end is. And 9 times out of 10, it's not what you think it is. It's what they think they should say to you so that they sound as if they are knowledgeable, or they're not stupid, or they're not being emotional, they're not being weak or wishy-washy. But it is that thing.
And you're painting an interesting picture. I mean, that relates to businesses in the UK. You're talking about making tax digital. You're talking about HMRC, which is Her Majesty's Revenue, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which is the UK equivalent of the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, or SARS in South Africa. It's the global reality. Every country has a tax collection authority, and HMRC is the one we have here in the UK. But you say that even though you're talking about making tax digital, that is an imperative on businesses to be going digital. But this is something that almost any business faces. They can move things to the cloud. You talked about Xero. You talked about any number of these cloud services, which mean that an accountant or financial advisor these days has to almost be a digital bridge builder, because this is the opportunity, isn't it? Most clients are small businesses. And from an accountant or financial advisor's perspective, helping those businesses start to bridge the divide between where they are and where they need to be by going digital, that's the opportunity. But give us a sense of what businesses in the UK are facing right now when it comes to the push to go online, to go digital, to go into the cloud.
Actually, you're spot on when you call it a bridge. If I go back to when cloud accounting was in its infancy, so I think in the US we had FreshBooks, for example, and we had Wave. QuickBooks was still predominantly on the desktop, and Sage dominated in the UK, and I don't think we had Xero yet. That's how old I am, and so on. Even then, the minute those came about, I was moving clients to those platforms. I had a few people that were a little bit reluctant, but they didn't get a choice, because I didn't start with moving your accounts into the cloud. As a profession, the accounting profession can come a little late to the party. If you look at other professions, the US and Australia, for example, are amazing. New Zealand, amazing at this. South Africa, in that so many businesses, because they had people coming straight online as business owners, by default, they created a world that lived online. So software as a service is kind of late for us, but the infrastructure for how that works has been around for a lot of years. So it's like they used to say, if you want to learn marketing, look at the porn industry. You may not think they're connected, but they ironed out the kinks. So if you look at a lot of the old software IT companies and what they're doing online, they've ironed out the kinks. So if we're smart, we look at what they've done and we emulate it. And what happens with businesses who are trying to move online, particularly in the UK, where we are traditionally, or have been traditionally, an industrial-based type of country. Similarly, well, Australia, a lot more agriculture and so on, but we are cities. So what tends to happen is you have businesses built around bricks and mortar and infrastructure and people. Now you're saying to them that has to change to accommodate some software, which is effectively what we're saying. Where is the business advantage in that? So there's a lot of emphasis on saying the disadvantages of not going in the cloud, which now are apparent if you're in the Western society, because you're not getting a lot of choice, because the manufacturers are no longer supporting a lot of the desktop stuff. And on the other side, you're getting all the advantages of going into the cloud, no more backing up and security and work from a beach with your shorts on and so forth. What we're not getting is the bridge in the middle, as you so eloquently put it, is this is where you are now. This is where we need to be. What are the obstacles that are stopping us from getting there? And those things are not necessarily answered by accountants, but we can answer them if we gear up to that, so that people don't have to stay in this it's like an abyss. Well, I'm here, I need to get there. How do I bridge it? It's all well and good you just come and log me on and I buy a subscription. But I've got 20 people in my office who have to buy into this. How are you helping me with that?
And that, as you said, isn't an issue that's limited to developed economies. I mean, this shift to cloud computing and SaaS, the software as a service, is happening almost everywhere. And as you've said, when you're working in IT with some of those banks, disruption never stops. It was happening then, it's happening now. Things are always changing. But in the context of the work you do, let's talk about the accountant or the financial advisor dealing with small businesses or clients making that first move to digital. Perhaps they've heard that they now have to follow HMRC's instructions to make tax digital. They have to now, as financial advisors or accountants, they have to be advising the non-digital client base that they have to leave that pen and paper behind. So then they've got to sit down with that client and say, right, here's how we get from where we are to where we need to be. But of course, in that conversation, is their typical client in this position telling their advisor everything the advisor needs to know in order for the advice to help the client? Or are there things that they're not talking about? Give us a sense of what happens there.
Well, okay, I'll go back to the very, very beginning. I didn't create this, but I kind of tweaked it for myself. When I did a lot of networking and so on, I joined a group of people, and the idea was how we would grow our service businesses so that we were not basically, as most accountants and bookkeepers would know, working 24 hours a day and burnt out. And even though there is technology, it's like going from mixing a cake by hand to mixing it in a blender. It still requires supervision. It still requires some knowledge. You can't just throw every stuff in there because now you've got a machine. There still needs to be some sort of understanding of how it works, what goes in, the ingredients, what you're going to get at the other end. And a lot of accountants quite cleverly have held off. Some of them saying, well, you know what, I won't even be in the game soon, so I can leave it alone, because they're smart enough to realise it's not just more of the same, but in the cloud. It's a whole shift from how we work, how we communicate, and what we offer right at the beginning. So when I started this networking thing, as I say, the cloud wasn't so as entrenched as it is, but it was in a lot of my peers' industries, and I was fascinated by this, and I was constantly trying to think, how do I incorporate this in my business? How do I incorporate it in my business? And I remember going to a business speed dating conference, and what we had were accounting professionals and business owners, startups mainly. And we were asked to answer their questions in a speed dating environment. And every time the tables, you know how it works, you sit down and someone sits in front of you and they ask you questions, and then you move around and you move around and you move around. Because there were more accountants than there were business people, we were doubling up and we were sharing that person. And without fail, everybody there needed some kind of financial help, and the response would be to give the card. And yes, I'm good at QuickBooks. Yes, I'm good at Xero. Yes, I use Sage Online, and yes, I use Cashflow and so on. Here's my card. I'm sure I can help you. And I kept saying to everybody, you don't need me yet. You don't need me yet. And we were, what? You don't need me yet. What is it that you're not managing to do right now? Now, a few of them were just too young, and when you're an accountant and a bookkeeper, you're always aiming to sell your service as opposed to fix their problem. So what I started to do was just get a handle on what problems these people needed fixing. And my best clients, some of my best clients now, one of them was a brewery. And he's just said, I want to leave my job. My colleague is working in the business and I can't afford to do it. That's not a bookkeeping problem per se. We can find the problems in bookkeeping, but that's what he wanted to do. You also have other people who will say other things to you. As I said before, I want to have a legacy for my children. So then what do you do? So some people might say, well, actually, I want to create a legacy. I want to create a business that I can not work in 5 years from now. I want to sell my business. Now, accountants will answer those questions, but even though those are the answers to the questions, they're still deeper. So one of the things I was taught to do in my networking group was when someone answers a question, you have two ways of responding. And why is that? And why is that? And why is that? Or, and so, and so, and you let them go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually you say, because my wife thinks that I can't do this and I'm going to show her that I can. Ah, okay. Now I know what I'm working with. So when this man resists certain things but embraces certain others, that's what's at the back of his mind.
Finally, you get to what's really going on. And we were talking about MTD making tax digital. That is another reality for businesses here in the UK. Businesses, we discussed, are being compelled to move their accounting and tax work to the cloud. So let's talk about what that means in practice. I mean, where does the typical small business start on the journey to the cloud? Because I suppose as an accountant or a financial advisor, the first thing you would go is straight to the scanner. You get right, scan everything. But sometimes you're already further down the road than some clients, aren't you? So give us a practical example, a client story of where the typical small business might start on their journey to the cloud. Is a scanner step one?
It is indeed. And two things, the scanner and a pen and paper. Actually, when I did it, I mean, we now have things like Zero work papers and practice and sort of practice platform software and so on. But mine was Teamwork. It was Teamwork PM at the time. Now it's teamwork.net or Trello or so on. And basically, I'll give you an example. A client I have today, and they've grown leaps and bounds now. Even I can't believe how much they've just mushroomed and expanded. Their start with me was just digitizing, because I always want to understand how the business works. Often, the idea is when I get to that stage, the get out is you may not need me for the bookkeeping or the account side. Well, I always say get an accountant, but you may not need me because we've got you so digitized now. By the time they see how it works, they don't want to do it. So they go, George, can you carry on? And when your team do it. So yeah, fine. And what you're trying to do is say, show me how you do this. Now, most people at the moment, they get a piece of paper, they get an invoice. Of course, we're cloud and digital with email now. Most invoices are happily coming by email. Many people still print those off, or maybe they are saving them into Dropbox or into an intranet and so forth. But even that has a method. So show me how you do it. And a lot of the reasons why people are reluctant to go into the cloud is that they like the idea of it. But in practice, when you start digitizing your documents, it's painful. It takes longer sometimes. There's a method in putting something in a filing cabinet. And yes, you put it into Dropbox or Box or wherever, or your network or your intranet, but then you can't find it because there's no system. And what the big gap in the middle, when I said earlier, we're busy selling what people need to know to move into the cloud and how wonderful it is. We're busy telling them that when they get there, this is what life will be like. But the bridge in the middle is that when we come along and we've convinced someone to move everything into the cloud, what we're ignoring is that back at base, in their world, in their office, with their staff and the way that they've run their business, does not lend itself very easily to that platform. We know it will work, we know it'll be brilliant, but many of the reasons, if we're honest, that we think it will work or we want it to work is because it will make our lives easier. You know what I mean? We're not having to do the scope creep reduces, we hope. We then don't have to be chasing paperwork as much because it's digitized, that they're forwarding emails to us or they're uploading into Receipt Bank or similar type of software. But this has to leave that company and get to us or get to the software, or even within their own business, get into the digitized form, into the cloud. And that is what I would teach people to do. So I either used to teach them how to do it, or I would set it up and we would do it for them. So by the time the conversation about the accounting came around, that was already in place. So it was just a case of, can you carry on? Yes. And by that, I knew their business inside and out. I would know staff members. We all know how often it is we have to ask a question of a client. What's this? What's that? When you know their business really well, you don't have to ask those questions. Or you see something come up and you go, oh, that was that event they did the other day. That's what that is. Because you're not just seeing the end of the story with the accounting. You're seeing the actual filing of, and in fact, we now manage the filing side as well. So we share that. So even that has become part of my remit as opposed to just the accounting.
And that's the crucial part of what we're talking about, to become irreplaceable in a world where many of the services provided by accountants and financial advisors seem to be moving to the cloud, seem to be becoming more commoditized. Not simply understanding their story, but almost being part of your client's story is really where the opportunity lies. And I think we'll continue our conversation about that shortly as we discuss some more practical steps to remain irreplaceable. In the moment, I'm just going to do a mid mention. You still got 15 minutes, have you, Georgette? Super. All right. So let me just carry on with this. Right. Mid-roll mention coming in 3, 2, 1. I'm Kyle Hallen. We're talking to Georgette Rowland Osborne about how to become irreplaceable in a world of commodities. Our conversation will continue very soon, but in the meantime, I'd like to welcome anyone who has just discovered the Go Beyond Disruption podcast for the first time. Welcome. You can find out more about our guests, our organization, and this topic via the links in our show notes, and you can view those in your podcast app. If you'd like to listen to our other episodes, we've got more than 65 to browse through. Visit gobeyonddisruption.com, scroll down the page, click on the subscribe button, and if you're already a subscriber, why not tell a friend or your network, your colleagues, about the show? It's always nice to reach more people. Speaking of which, let's pick up our conversation with Georgette Rowland Osborne about staying irreplaceable and becoming a client whisperer. So let's jump to what's happening now. Georgette, would you outline some practical steps to help members of the profession turn the current changes into opportunities? What are some things that we shouldn't overlook? Because we do tend to go for scan everything, but we've overlooked the fact that many businesses may not have a scanner. So what are some better practices that you'd recommend?
At the moment, it's very difficult to survive without the scanner when you're dealing with more established businesses who have been around for a while. And they then require, and I have a few of those, you have to educate and get buy-in from the people on the ground floor, the staff. Your smaller businesses, where you don't have that issue so much, a lot of the one-man band startups and you're less than 10 people, to move them to an almost exclusive. Remember, paperless doesn't mean paper free, it just means paperless. We're never going to completely get rid of all paper because the rest of the world, this is a global economy. Not everybody in the world is at the same place at the same time. And within that, you have individuals that will still do things their way because it just makes their life easier. So you have to accommodate that, just that the paper side will reduce or is reducing. But what you do is, again, you go back to the system. So when I say the scanner could be replaced by email, or that could be replaced by a project management system, or it's just simply where you save documents online. And then what you're doing with that pen and paper I mentioned before is you're saying, how do I do this? And you're writing it down. Now, if you've got me, I'm doing that for you. So I'm going around, in the same way when you have a VAT inspection or VAT inspection, or you have an audit and the auditor walks around asking questions that you rather not answer and annoying everybody. That's me. But I'm asking you about the operations side, because the operations is what feeds into the accounts. So if that is working a certain way and we understand that, then we can give suggestions and targeted training for that. Now, the problem with that is we're in a world where we are trying to work less. So to work less, we need to streamline. But that streamlining is what is feeding into becoming commoditized. So as accountants, we have to decide which side of that fence do we want to be on. If you prefer to stay in the commoditized world because it's easier to streamline, you can have a lot more clients on board because you're doing things in a systematic way for pretty much all of them, that's great. Or you go the other side, the boutique side, as I like to call it, because I like to tell myself it's a boutique business. Whereas you become, like you say, the client whisperer. And each of those clients are a whole human being to me. Their staff are all whole human beings. And every day I'm trying to think of a better way to make them more efficient internally. What happens is your relationship transcends the fact that you're dealing with them on account and bookkeeping, and you become, like in The Godfather, the part played by Robert Duvall, the consigliere. And he just used to sit there while Don Corleone would speak, and Don Corleone would get on something, and he would turn to his consigliere. His name escapes me at the moment, and he would say, and he would whisper back into the Don's ear, and the Don would then answer the question. Well, that's me. I whisper in your ear, and you answer the question, or you don't. When you get to that, it's very difficult to replace you, because they have to. If you imagine, if you've been in a relationship for years and years and years. One of the reasons people don't leave relationships is because, I'm going to have to break someone else in. I'm going to have to retrain a new man or a new woman. That's not the best reason to stay in a relationship. But what if you stay in that relationship because this person just knows me so well? They know what makes me tick. They understand me. I don't even have to finish my sentences. I don't have to explain myself. They just get it. Imagine being that type of accountant or bookkeeper. How often do you think they would be trying to replace you? And even if you mess up, you will always get the amount of leeway you need to make it right again, because the relationship is so solid.
That's something that has come to you after you've worked for some huge financial services companies and brands in the past. And you've now made it very clear that companies of that size do not represent the vast majority of businesses that accountants and financial advisors these days may be working for, especially if, as you say, you're looking more at the kind of the more bespoke, the more boutique side of things, or perhaps your career is just starting out. Now, for an accountant or a finance advisor that would be dealing with small clients that have been working with paper forever, for example, things like sports clubs, social clubs, so many of those organizations, what do these financial advisors or accountants need to know from their clients' perspectives that would help them be better advisors, better friends, and manage those transitions to digital more effectively?
Well, sports clubs are my thing at the moment. I'm now speaking the language of the golf club. And the biggest thing that was an issue in there was you are dealing with people where there are a lot of chiefs, and usually a few people in the middle who are answerable to them above and them below. And the chiefs have no clue how the day-to-day run. Not really. So your job is to make that person in the middle who you're working with look good at all times, so that they just don't get stress from above or from the committee and so on. So everything you do is, how do I reduce the stress? How do I make them look good? So the best example I have is one of the clubs I'm dealing with. They were using Sage Desktop, for example, and their accountant was very reluctant to move. So I became the disruptor in there, and I said, you know how many things you could do? Imagine being at home, and rather than run into the club when there's a problem, you just log on to a laptop and fix it from there and take a look from there when the chairman asks you a question. Now you're driving to the club because you can't answer. They had a storage room at the back, which was just full with archive because it's got to be there for 7 years. You cannot imagine the paper that a golf club can produce. It is eye-watering. It's mostly gone now because most of it sits in digital form. You have the chefs uploading their receipts. I had to show them that. It couldn't have been conceived before, but it was just a case of, what is everybody's pain point? The general manager's pain point was everybody was calling him for something and he never got to go home. The admin manager's pain point was a similar thing, and she was doing everything in Excel, in Word. So, okay, how can we bring all of that into one system so that you do something once instead of 3 or 4 times, so your errors go down and you're not getting into trouble? Because, and you notice what, there's a theme here. It's all about getting into trouble. That was the theme. Not annoying people, not upsetting people, not seeming incompetent, looking as if you have really got this down. That business has transformed from a sports club to now it's a hospitality club with a fully fledged restaurant, which could never have been, and I don't mean just a clubhouse, I mean a fully fledged restaurant that is 2.5 times the revenue that it was just 18 months ago, because they can move so much more faster, they're more agile, no more staff. We've just digitized and we've just changed systems. I'll see something and I'll go, guess what I saw at a conference? You guys need to try this. Well, how does that work? Oh, I'll come in next week and I'll show you. Or education. The big thing that changed it all for me, and it's not new, everybody's going to go, yeah, we know that, but I wonder how many people do it, is every time I did something, I recorded how you did it. Because as accountants and bookkeepers, we like to keep things to ourselves because it makes us important. What I started to do was teach people via video all the little things I was doing and saying, there you go, off you go. They won't do it because they haven't got time. But in times of stress or when they need to just get something done, there's the information they need. It's not you talking at them, it's you showing them how they get from A to B in this area. So it becomes real.
And I bet that with those real benefits that business has now been able to realize, they never want to see the back of you. They want to keep you around for as long as they can. So what's the secret if we want to remain invaluable, to become irreplaceable? How do we connect with clients, not only professionally and digitally, but as you've been saying, personally, sometimes even emotionally as well? So give us a sense of, if we were eavesdropping on one of these conversations, what would one of these kind of initial conversations with the client sound like? If we leant in, what would we hear?
Okay. I won't go into too much detail, but I would have said to people, okay, fast forward 6 months from now. And it's not what would your business look like, because that's a hard question for people to answer. 6 months from now, I'm your fairy godmother. You've got these 3 or 4 things that are driving you crazy. What would they be? And how would you get rid of them? And normally people say, well, I know what they are, but I just don't know how to get rid of them. They've already done your job for you. Because in your head, you're never answering the question. You're never telling them what you're going to do, how they can do it, what they can use. All you're doing is listening, because your brain is going, oh, that can do, oh yeah, oh my gosh, we could do this and we can do that. And you're just formulating. But what I tend to do, even though I say it's a conversation, I actually give people a little grid piece of paper with a picture on it. And the picture says where you are now. The other side says where you want to be, and in the middle it's got all the obstacles, and we start with the obstacles and I go write down all those things, and it's in black and white. They get to keep it as well. I mean, obviously I have a copy. They get to keep it, and it's just a reminder of why, if they stay where they are, things won't get any better. And my favourite question is, if you were given the option for everything to stay as it is now for the next year, would that be fine with you? And of course they say no. All right. You now know what they need to change because you'd gone through all of that. You're just putting your finger on their head really and just pressing harder. And you're just saying, well, this is going to be another year. And they're like, oh, no. And then you leave them because you can bombard people. And what I then tend to do is go away and come back to them with what I propose would be a great idea of how they could. I'm still not telling them how. I'm just saying what is possible. And then once you get that buy-in and you're in the door, to some degree, you're not necessarily got the deal or whatever, that's when you bit by bit start trickling the how. Because if you go in with how and you can move to this and move to that, people just go, oh, it's too much.
Right, you've been talking about looking 6 months ahead, so let's ask you to do the same thing. If we looked ahead of the curve and perhaps put our eyes on what's on the horizon, the next big disruption coming up in this context, what's one big change that you think lies ahead? We talked about making tax digital, but there must be other things on the way for finance professionals. How do we prepare for what's coming next?
Well, I think I touched a little bit on it. And number one, I am not the crystal ball for big disruptions. I actually think history tells us what they are. Because the lucky thing with us in accounting, as I've said, is that we are slightly behind disruptive industries. So if we look to them, as they say, Uber has the most taxis on the road but doesn't own a single cab. You know what I mean? You have companies like Vodafone who employ hundreds of thousands of people. Yet you have Airbnb, who's on a par in terms of maybe reach, but has a fraction of that. What are they doing that we're not? And I've always been obsessed with how do you get more out of less? The problem that we are going to find, and it's not a disruption because we can see it coming from afar, it's here now, is that we are so busy trying to digitize people and streamline people and move people into the cloud as one area of it, that we will lose sight of the most important thing of all, that the more we are connected online, the less opportunity people have to be connected offline. And the businesses that can marry the first one with the touch of the second one will be the ones that I think will thrive.
Okay, so I think that's a very practical spot to wrap up. But before we do, let's connect our listeners with some of those resources that you've been talking about. If we want to do some signposting for those who'd like to find out more about the topic in general, or perhaps about you or your work in particular, where would you recommend they look online?
Well, most people, my website is financialgymforbusiness.com.
And that's gym as in gymnasium, not name as in it's life gym, because we know it.
Yeah, GYM. And it's forbusiness.com. And if you scroll down the front page, there's a section called Highly Recommended. So it's things that I think are great little tools, or things that would be useful to you. Also there, it's very old now and I don't advertise it much, but many, 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 many years ago, I used to do a video series called 5 Ways to Move into the Cloud or something, before it was actually fashionable and so on. And it's still there. And it was just literally over 5 different ways for you to start. So get your scanner, get you this. Now, I tend to now just give it to clients because, as I say, if you take it bit by bit, they look at it. I actually give it away. I give it away as well. It's the camera quality is wonderful. It's going back 5 or 6 years. But what it is it gives people a taste of what they can do. And some of them will run with it. So there's that. And then also my YouTube, which is also Financial Gym, where I do just do tutorials and do all the things that I would charge for are on YouTube.
We'll put links to your LinkedIn
Indeed.
page, I think, in our show notes, as well as perhaps a link to that 5 ways to get started with crossing that digital divide. So that takes us to the biggie now, finally. One message that you'd like to leave for accounting and finance professionals that will help them go beyond disruption. What would that be?
Build in lots of touch points with your clients so that it becomes normal, not just the quarterly meeting or the management reports. Customers can read profit and loss accounts now. What they want is insight. And the more you touch them, within reason, is the more your insight is targeted to them. And become a business where you, as a business owner, or you can almost become someone who that's your job. And if you can afford to, get rid of a lot of the compliance and the grunt stuff so that you can spend more time in connection with your client, whether it be people or technology.
So to take them further, start by getting closer. I think that's a great place to end our conversation today. Georgette Rowland Osborne from Financial Gym, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. There is plenty more to explore about how to remain irreplaceable. So we make sure that the show notes to this episode include links to all the resources you've mentioned, and people can visit gobeyonddisruption.com for more. 2 other websites we'd recommend for listeners interested in taking this further. You may already be using one or the other of these websites, depending on whether you're in the CGMA or the AICPA universe. So aicpastore.com/gobeyonddisruption or cgmastore.com/gobeyonddisruption. That's where you'll find courses, webinars, and more professional development resources consistently updated to keep you ahead of the curve. Thanks again to our guest and to you for listening. From our London office, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at aicpa-cima.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein, and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.